All right, guys, welcome back to the show. We're going to get into the second part of our pre-draft NFL power rankings. We're going to have numbers 5 through 1, and obviously with the last segment, there was probably some picks on that that some people might not necessarily agree with. But as everybody says when they're making power rankings, these are my power rankings, and you're welcome to disagree with them if you want. These are just my opinions on where everything stands with each team at this point in the offseason. So let's go ahead and get into the next part of the power rankings here. So I have number 5, I have the Baltimore Ravens, and this, is not really surprising. This is where we're getting into the real, contenders, Super Bowl contenders here. Every single one of these teams on this list is a Super Bowl contender, and the Baltimore Ravens are going to be coming back extra motivated after having a tremendous year, really, in the regular season in terms of running the ball and being explosive on offense. They had Derrick Henry go for nearly 2,000 yards. Lamar Jackson had over 4,000 yards passing and 41 touchdowns and just four interceptions. And he added a couple rushing touchdowns as well and almost ran for 1,000 yards himself. So he was fantastic and arguably could have won the MVP last year, and that would have made 3 MVPs for Lamar had he won that last year. So I have the Ravens there. I like they haven't done a whole bunch this offseason so far in terms of free agency. They did re-sign Ronnie Stanley, which was a good move for them. They want to keep that, solidify that right side of the line. But, of course, Ronnie Stanley is getting up there in age, and he has had injury issues in the past. So you got to look that they're probably going to try and upgrade that position. They've still got Rosengarten who can move over there to that position as well. But they're probably going to fix that through the draft, maybe add a young guy at some point in the draft. Whether it's the first round or not, that'll be determined. But as of right now, I have the Ravens at number 5, and I like what they could potentially do. I still think they're the class of that division in the AFC North. I think the Cincinnati Bengals, as I talked about in the last segment, are going to be much better and much more competitive with the Ravens this year than they were last year. I believe it's a 2-team race between the Ravens and Bengals as to who wins that division. I like everything that the Ravens represent in terms of, what they're able to do offensively. Defensively, they're always tough. They struggled a little bit last year in the early going, but once they handed reins over to Dean Pease, or once he came back to the facility and became more of a part of that defense, you really started to see, why the Ravens defense is always so good, because it was usually coordinated by Dean Pease, but he left, and they didn't have him as defensive coordinator last year, but they did have him in the booth, helping to call plays and all that. So he is obviously a great defensive mind, and it shows that each and every year, typically. So the Ravens are still good, obviously coached by John Harbaugh, and he is one of those guys that has come up recently in whether or not his seat is hot at all in Baltimore. I don't personally believe it is, but I think the argument that people are making with that is that he has had this loaded offensive team for a number of years now, and they haven't really been able to get over the hump in the playoffs. I mean, obviously they have Derrick Henry, and they just had him last year, so they've only had him for the 1 year, but they, I'm sure, are expecting nothing short of a Super Bowl appearance this coming season. I would think that that's probably a failure if they don't get that. That's probably what their mindset is as of this point with everything that's happened with Lamar in the playoffs. Although Lamar has gotten much better and was not the reason why they lost last year in the playoffs to Buffalo, but he still has that record of not doing necessarily great in the playoffs, but he has to get over that. So he's got to win. He's got to get to the big game in order to get over that. Otherwise, people are going to hang that over his head for the majority of his career. So that's what I have at number 5. At number 4, I have the Buffalo Bills, the team that beat the Ravens in the playoffs, and obviously having Josh Allen on that team is always going to give them a shot, and they're always going to be right up there as one of the best teams in the league so long as he is their quarterback. And I can absolutely see the Bills finally breaking that curse and actually getting to the Super Bowl this year. And we'll have to see what they do in the in the draft coming up. I know we went over some of their needs when we were going through the different season outlooks for everybody. But the Bills, obviously, they don't have necessarily the big names at the wide receiver position. They have, Keon Coleman, the rookie from last year. They have Khalil Shakir still there, who's still a solid receiver. But Josh Allen, they basically do it with pretty much, relative no names. No disrespect to those players, but relative no names when you compare them to the likes of, say, a Jamar Chase or a Justin Jefferson or something like that. But they're still able to get the job done throughout the season, and they are always usually the best team in that division. And they are, slated to be the best team in that division again this year. They are the favorites to win it because, everybody else in that division is getting better, though. So I don't think it's going to be as much of a cakewalk as it's been in recent years for the Bills, with, of course, the Dolphins, Jets, and, Patriots all struggling at various points of the seasons. But the Bills have been the class of that division. They still are. But like I said, everybody in that division is getting better. And obviously, Sean McDermott. See, the Bills they're very similar to Baltimore in the situation that their head coaches are in. They're both very, very good head coaches. Although I would say probably Sean McDermott has more of a hot seat than John Harbaugh does. For the most part, because John Harbaugh, at the end of the day, he still does have a Super Bowl title. So that does give some leeway there. But Sean McDermott does not have that, and that is one of the reasons why people have talked about him, potentially moving on, or them moving on from Sean McDermott. I think that would be a mistake because I think he's a very good coach, and any team would probably snatch him up really quickly. He wouldn't be on the job market for very long during the head coaching hiring cycle that we always get to at the end of the Super Bowl, in the next few days after the Super Bowl. But yeah, so I like the Bills there at number 4. So moving on to our top 3 teams here. The third team is the team that just appeared in the Super Bowl representing the AFC, and that is the Kansas City Chiefs. I have them down at 3 because I feel like they were exposed a little bit in that Super Bowl against Philadelphia, not being able to protect the passer as much as they need to, and showing some signs of age in Travis Kelce. Then, even though Travis Kelce is coming back this year for his 13th season, he showed a lot of signs last year that, and particularly in that Super Bowl, that he may not be playing for much longer. I honestly thought that he might retire this past offseason, or this offseason that we're in now, but he has already announced that he's going to come back. I don't think, I've said this a whole bunch of times and ended up being proven wrong, but I don't think the Chiefs are set up to be Super Bowl champions again this year. I just think there's way too much talent in the AFC, and I think that game against the Eagles put some, tape on that some teams can study and potentially learn from as to how to attack that offense. When you get pressure on Patrick Mahomes, that's what tends to beat the Chiefs. Even take a look at that Super Bowl that they were in, the other Super Bowl that they lost to Tom Brady and the Buccaneers. It was very similar to the Philadelphia Eagles Super Bowl. They got pressure on Mahomes. They beat him up throughout the majority of that game, and then they ended up blowing them out, much like the Eagles did. Obviously, the Eagles put up more points, but it was still domination in both of those games, and I think both of those games showed that is the key to really, ending the Chiefs, run, or ending their dynasty, is if you can continuously get pressure on, that offensive line. Now, the Eagles were doing it without sending much pressure at all. So if you can get pressure with 4, obviously you need a great defensive line and great defensive coordinator to put your players in that position to be able to do that. But the Chiefs, at the end of the day, I still have them at number 3 because they're still the Chiefs. They're still a tough team. They're still going to be up there as the team to beat. Everyone's going to look at them as the team to beat in the AFC until somebody takes them out in the AFC, because they get to the AFC Championship game every single year. Patrick Mahomes has literally been to the AFC Championship game every single year he's been the starter as the Chiefs. So they are still the team to beat in the AFC. and they're going to have to people are going to have to go through them most likely, because it's just the way it always goes. And I still have them at number 3. They are the number 1 team in the AFC when you take a look at these power rankings, because my top 2 teams are both in the NFC, and I think you can guess which 2 teams those are. So speaking of which, let's get into that. The number 2 team that I have on my list is the Detroit Lions, and obviously questions kind of abound with this team going into this coming season, because they have 2 new coordinators, as both defensive coordinator Aaron Glenn left to be the head coach of the Jets, and of course, as we talked about, Ben Johnson going over to Chicago to be their head coach. So it's going to be a different situation for Detroit. Not the same faces, so probably not the same scheme, but they've still got the same players for the most part, and will probably add some players on defense to shore up that defense that was just injured like crazy last year. Everybody got hurt seemingly, so they want to obviously add to their defense and make their defense better, because when it was relatively healthy, they still weren't necessarily great. So they lost Carlton Davis, their starting corner, lost him to New England in free agency. So they, of course, want to look at trying to shore up the secondary, as well as maybe get somebody else alongside Aiden Hutchinson to be a great edge rusher like Hutchinson is. And Hutchinson, obviously being hurt last year, definitely hurt the Detroit Lions' chances overall in the season, but they were still able to win games during the regular season. It was only until they got to the playoffs that they ended up being taken out by the up-and-coming Commanders, who we talked about in the last segment. But I like the Lions. I still like Dan Campbell. I still like them to be one of the best teams in the NFL this year. Jared Goff is still a great player. Of course, they've got that dynamic duo in the backfield with David Montgomery. So obviously they're going to be a very, very good team. They're going to be very hard to beat, as they always are. So I have them at number 2 and number 1. Got to put the Eagles at number 1, because they are the Super Bowl champions, and they have lost a lot of defensive pieces this offseason, but they've still got a squad, that they've got a lot of depth on defense, and they, can still add to that as the draft comes up here in the next month or so. But, they're a very, very good team overall, and, Super Bowl champions, very well coached, and of course having Jalen Hurts and Saquon Barkley and A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith and that mammoth offensive line, all of those things help. And that's why they are as good as they are. That offensive line and their defensive line, at least last year, was, 2 of the best units collectively in the NFL. They were very, very good. And that was the big reason why they won the Super Bowl, was that just winning in the trenches on both sides of the ball. And that's the way that team has been built, and they are going to be up there as the team to beat in the NFL, because they have the target on their backs now. They're the Super Bowl champions, so they got to go out and defend that crown. And I think they'll do a good job in doing that. I don't know if they'll get to the Super Bowl or not. It's not quite time for Super Bowl picks just yet. Maybe we get to that after the draft and kind of see where everybody stands. Maybe we'll do a segment on who I think could potentially be in the Super Bowl, or maybe some Super Bowl matchups that people might like to see. So maybe we'll cover that in a later show. But before we go ahead and get into the next part of our show, as always, we're going to take another quick break. So just stick with us, and we'll be right back right after this.
Looking for your daily